What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Spilling the Beans. Today I'm sitting down with my partner Brian Fast in Smart Management. It's a software that we're developing for project management, property management, and asset management, all AI-based, artificial intelligence, intelligent automation, and all sorts of other amazing things that we've integrated into this, so that way you can run your properties more effectively, more efficiently, make more money, reduce costs, increase income, increase NOI, and multiples of additional value to the enterprise value of your building. So we're going to sit down, talk about that software, where we've seen a lot of bottlenecks, how we've made a lot of fixes in that, and how you can then utilize it in order to integrate into your own operations to create more efficiencies and effectiveness in order to increase your bottom line. Brian Fast, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you today?
Good, man.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming down to Charleston.
For sure.
We got some good stuff that we're working on here, and a lot of progress made since the last time we sat down on Spilling the Beans. For those who don't know, Brian and I are partnered up on a SaaS software, specifically for project management, property management, and asset management. And there's a lot of really good stuff going on. Brian's got a huge, very successful background in the tech and software engineering space, and has actually left that field altogether in order to focus on this opportunity, and it's super cool. There's a lot of buzzwords right around artificial intelligence, intelligent automation, smart manufacturing, and that's kind of what we've piggybacked on in order to make smart management. And so the software has progressed pretty substantially over the course of, we've been working on it for over 2 years now, right?
Yep.
And obviously having meetings before that and talking through a lot of things. And I think what would be good is, like, let's hit on a lot of the bottlenecks that many management companies and owners are facing, which essentially was the catalyst in order to kind of create this software, right? There's so many different things, there's so many different variables, there's so many different moving parts in any given real estate deal and the management of that real estate deal. And I've seen it over and over and over again that these management companies don't do a good job, right? It's consistently the conversation of, like, I had to move management companies because they weren't getting it done. They weren't thinking like an owner. And I don't think it's because the management company wants to do a bad job, right? I don't think it's because they're trying to, like, burn people. The reality is they got bad resources and potentially poorly trained people, or they're not paying them enough, or they have these bottlenecks that occur with the personnel and with whatever software and data that they're using in order to make decisions. And so that's the entire idea behind smart management, is eliminate the human error, right? Automate a lot of the processes, use AI and use technology in order to help reduce cost and forecast better, so that way you have more predictability in what's going on, right?
Yep, for sure. I would say what caused us to really want to lean into this is you got sort of two different types of users, right? You have the major construction users, right, that build $100 million complexes, right? In that use case, you have dedicated project engineers. You got dedicated project managers that go out and are buying. And if you look at what their margins are, right? They bid jobs on 6% margin.
Yep.
Right? Why do they do that? Well, they do that, and it makes sense because they're turning their money so quick, right? They're not outlaying a bunch of cash. So if you look internally to their ROI is 100% type of thing, if they do what they say that they're going to, if they can actually fulfill the contractual obligations. But the big part of that is making sure that you can turn things effectively. And so they staff up for that and they manage it in a professional way, right? If we look at the way most apartment complexes in let's say anything under 30 million, right? You don't have a dedicated staff that's just there to do it, right? Your user is somebody that's operating that property, that's wearing the COO hat, but they're also wearing the CFO hat. Right? How does that person walk both of those lines effectively? It's really hard to find that person, especially in and amongst commercial real estate where you're dealing with all the people drama on top of it, right? So I would say to me, the important part is we need to work smarter in order to give them the tools that allow them to go chase all the people drama on site and have the ability for, let's say, regional or corporate oversight to come in and say, hey, what are you doing wrong today before it impacts our bottom line? Today, what I see is everybody's working and it's all reactive. Once rents fall, once revenue drops, once expenses shoot up, we're now then closing the loop. And by the time you close that loop, you're talking 4, 6, 8 weeks later, and you're gone, right? Like you've missed your ability to really recapture that revenue. So I would say what we've really been focused on is to say, hey, we want to come in and look at what we've done in industrial automation, right? We should be able to bring those tried and true principles into management systems such that we have insight to what's going on, such that your COO, Matt Carlin, would be able to log in and know what's happening such that when we come to the meeting, we're talking about the problems, not giving me an update on what is. I should already see what's going on. So that's really the goal of the software is to empower that on-site operations person to be more effective and to give the regional oversight the view into the data to know what levers to pull when to keep driving that revenue.
Yep, and as you hit on all these things, I keep on coming back to the two words of effectiveness and efficiency. And the effectiveness and the efficiency, when it's all said and done, like how does that impact an owner like me? Well, guess what? You don't need as much staff, right? Which means you reduce the amount of salaries that's eating into the expenses on the property's profit and loss statement, or you don't need to pay someone 6 figures in order to come in and manage this property. You can pay someone a little bit less because the software eliminates a lot of the human error and a lot of the decision making and a lot of those things that create the bottleneck around that. And all of that goes straight to the bottom line, right? When all these other expenses, interest rates are up, insurance costs are up, labor costs are up, material costs are up, all these other energy costs are up, all these other costs are up. How can we reduce expenses? How can we increase income, reduce expenses on a property? And that's exactly what this is meant to do. It's meant to take a look at all the different variables and proactively forecast as opposed to reactionarily respond, which, to your point, is lost 2 to 3 months of revenue because the profit and loss statement doesn't even come out until later, and then you got to implement the change in plans, and by the time it all goes full cycle, you're talking every bit of 8 to 12 weeks. And so this, at the end of the day, what I'm excited about is how it's going to save expenses, how it's going to point out how to generate more revenue, and all of that money goes straight to the bottom line now, where you take a property where everything else is an expense and everything else cost is going up. We're able to reduce the expense of operating that property and increase the net operating income, which then increases the valuation of the property, makes it more attractive for a buyer at the end of the day, for lenders to lend on that property, and there's just a peace of mind of knowing that the property is performing at its highest efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, revenue solves most problems, right? And
in business, for sure.
For sure, and it being able to reduce that risk, right? Like, to me, that's crucial because, like right now, your buy box has moved away from large heavy lift stabilization projects, but to me, really our goal should be the software should enable that box to be back wide open again, because, like, the problem is the contractor and being able to pay out and to know where operations are, the fact that those are disconnected systems is where our bottleneck is, right? There is so much time lost knowing who's doing what. You started with saying like, hey, we've been working on this for 2 years, which we have in 2+ years, right? Like, but full pencils down engineers working for 2 years. As we've leaned into making this work, the problem is we needed to have all the systems tied together. So essentially, we've become a full fintech, we've become a full project management software system, and a full operations suite, right? We've basically merged Asana and QuickBooks together, such that you're only
and AppFolio.
And AppFolio, right?
All of them.
It's really this concept of, the work that I'm doing here, as soon as I'm updating this, it should drive into my into my business process for being able to pay out bills, right? Like, and doing all that, we've been building the foundation that, when we start to talk AI, right? Like, and AI is the buzzword, but to me, it's really the ability to take that and automate it in a business aspect. The problem that everybody's going to have today with AI is that all the systems are disconnected, and how do you operationalize it? I would say what we've been investing in is to build that foundation such that all the data sources are all integrated into one, right? So not only are we doing Asana type of project management, AppFolio type of project management, QuickBooks, we've done full integrated communications, right? So we have all of the data within our system to be able to go lean on and leverage. So to me, that's the exciting part as we're looking at new ways to connect that to drive that top line growth.
So let's talk about an actual use case. Let's talk about the Illinois deal, right?
Yep.
The reason this all came to fruition or culminated was that you were a large investor in a 200 plus unit apartment complex that we purchased in Illinois, and you would hop on the weekly project management calls. And so every week our team from an asset management standpoint would get on the phone with the joint venture partners, just get on the phone with the site level management team and the third party management. So there'd be 3-4 teams on a weekly call that would run through a whole bunch of different key performance indicators and metrics and talk through all these things. And you hopped on because you were a big investor in that, and obviously you understand efficiencies and how to become more effective, and you wanted to help out on that side of things. And side note, we bought this building literally the month before COVID hit, right? We bought it in February of 2020, and then is a heavy value add, and we couldn't evict anybody for 18 months, right? Labor force was non-existent, supply chain was all derailed. There's a lot of variables. Let's take that out though. On those weekly project management calls, really there was just a lack of efficiency, right? Like, our team has always grown from just brute force, right? We're willing to do the work. We're willing to get our hands dirty, run through brick walls, as opposed to scaling and jumping over the brick wall kind of a thing, right? And you came in and said, hey, why do we have all these different softwares open? Why is there a Monday.com? Why is there AppFolio? Why is there QuickBooks and Google spreadsheets? And then there's a whiteboard over here that nobody else can see. And there were a lot of inefficiencies. So talk a little bit about that process of what you saw and how this vision kind of got created.
So maybe we jump, so Springfield's still, your team's still managing it, right?
Yep.
But I would say it's definitely on the other side now, right? Like, it's above 90% occupancy and collections, right? Like, it's performing well from a cash flow perspective. So if we go back in history and we look at, let's ignore the first 8 to 12 months, right? Because COVID hit and it was a disaster, right? Like, you couldn't do anything. But I would say once the team started doing work, right, I would say that there was a couple bottlenecks. I would say the biggest one that I think we have a unique solution for is the ability to monitor our revenue growth to approach that 90% threshold, which triggers our ability to recapitalize in the BRRRR method, right?
Yep.
I would say if you've got 10, 20 units, it's easy to do that math in your head. You can figure out, where you're trending and if you're approaching that goal. With over 200, and so in this case, it's 264 units, right? You can't do that math in your head. And the typical metrics that you're reporting in terms of, make-ready units, pre-leases, occupancy, all of that data that's reported on a weekly basis gives a false sense of positive. It tells you, if you try to do some basic first principles math, that you're approaching your goal. When in reality, you can't do that first principles in your head.
And I have seen this issue with every single management company.
Yep.
Management companies that manage a few hundred doors, management companies that manage 10 to 20,000 doors, and I've seen it with management companies that manage 100,000 plus doors, because I've used all of them before. Every single one of them has this exact issue.
And what happens is, and we see it in the data, you plateau at 80% and you think that what you're doing this month is going to impact next month. But in reality, what's happening is you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. This chess move here isn't having a net positive effect.
It's a net neutral.
It's
right.
a net neutral, and you just plateau at that point, right?
And so meaning what you're talking about is, they're looking at hey, here's how many open houses, here's how many inquiries and guest cards were filled out, and here's how many applications came in, and here's how many leases got signed, and how many units are rent ready. That's only half of the equation, right? Mm-hmm. The other half of the equation is how many tenants are delinquent, and forecasting what percentage of those tenants are going to need to be evicted or will eventually move out, right? How many of those tenants had a maintenance issue? How many tenants have a maintenance issue that need to move into one of the other rent-ready units because there's a maintenance issue and a leak that they have to move out, and you either put them up in a hotel for 3 months or you move them into a new unit, right? Like, yep. There's obviously tenants under eviction. There's tenants who naturally move out and leases that come due, and somebody goes and buys a house, or they move to another part of town or whatever. And it's harder to measure, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when you put it into a human's hands and tell them to try to balance that out and weigh it all out.
I would say a human can't do it.
Exactly.
Right? Like there's too many interconnected parts that you can't process that in your mind. You mm-hmm. have to do it through software. And hence the only way you can do it through software is to have all the data at your disposal to know how to interpret it, mm-hmm. right? And so that's what we've built in. We've built in that metric that just tells you next month, based on everything you're doing today, I can guarantee you where your occupancy is going to be next month, right? Like, I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's a complex algorithm that's needed. So driving that in, right? So from a Springfield perspective, the problem is operations was making decisions, assuming we were at this threshold and ready to go to underwriting. Mm-hmm. But because we didn't ever meet that, every month we kept thinking we were going to meet it, but in reality, we weren't moving, so then it couldn't trigger it. So then if we look at this delay, right, you've got a year delay going on where you now can't hit your 90%, you can't recapitalize, you can't, interest rates are shooting through the roof. We missed an opportunity where rates were low, right? So like it was the perfect storm in this regard, but even if you remove the impact of COVID, right, and refactor out, just on Springfield, not of extra costs or just the timeline impact was $1 million.
Yeah, call it 12 to 18 months.
Investment perspective, right? Yeah. It changed the ROI from a targeted 46% down to, I would say an 18, but in reality, COVID compensated adjustment, right? An 18% ROI. In reality, COVID, it's even lower than that. But like, to me, that's the part that we have to keep our eye on. You do that, all of a sudden, everybody has an agreed upon metric that we can chase, and we know if we're winning or not. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the problem. We can't go based on feelings. We got to go based on data.
Yep. And so, what do you see as far as like who is the ideal user? Is it a heavy value add user? Is it somebody who already buys a stabilized property? Like, if you're buying something that's new and stabilized, this can help in certain capacities, right? And at the same time, what I was interested about is, like, you had alluded to this a little bit earlier, but it's like these lenders need some sort of software like this. Like, I could see this being the go-to software that lenders require builders and any sort of construction management to use, because it puts all the data in the system, and they can very easily click a button, have access to all the reports and all the lien waivers and all the invoices and paid receipts and all those things. But more importantly, it gives that forecast of exactly where everything is, what it's going to, when the timeline is actually going to be, and that way they can't have the wool pulled over their eyes by a general contractor or by the owner or by whoever who is saying, hey, we're gonna be here because this is where we're at right now. It incorporates all of that, and again, removes the human error from it and gives them very clear timelines, price points, budgetary numbers to make sure that they have exactly what they need in order to move forward. So I can definitely see that from a project management standpoint, but from a property management standpoint, you're talking about all that stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the use case is the size of the project gets to the point where you can't logically keep track of it in your head, right? So is that 20 units? Is that 40 units, right? Like, so I think there's a threshold at which you just can't keep track of it in your head, right? So I think that's the more what the threshold is. Now, in regards to stabilized versus non-stabilized, right? Whenever you're doing a stabilized project, it's a natural transition, right? So like you're already typically acquiring a new property, so it's naturally a place where you're already going to typically transition into your own software. So that's a logical point where, hey, that's a good use case for us because it's a natural transition. I would say from, the harder the project is, right? I think the more there's upside for utilizing better processes, right? So I think there's definitely that aspect to what we're doing here. And especially because we're chasing the biggest pain point, which is your financial system tied to your operations system, right? And the fact that those two are correlated and we're no longer chasing lists of who's doing what and having to continually update it, because if you don't have that system in place, you can't get effectively paid in 2 weeks. And if you can't get effectively paid in 2 weeks, your project is going to stop because your contractor is either overbidding or they're cash strapped and they're carrying the bill, and now projects aren't, their timelines
they go
are
find
missed.
another job in order to keep cash going, and now all of a sudden the timeline gets delayed.
Exactly. So like certainly from a stabilized project perspective, all the things that we're building in are key for that. But I would say for a stabilized project, I mean, the worst thing you want to do is to go from a project that is performing and all of a sudden you take your eye off it, because it's always chasing the problem that's in front of us, right? So you're always going to drift to who's the squeaky wheel. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, because we're in reaction mode, we don't see that this big $100 million complex is struggling until it's struggling. And then once it is, that momentum is there and it takes 6 months to pull back, right? So the ability to look at that project and say that, hey, I know that I've got the pulse on this and my COO can remotely know what's going on the property, to me, that's the comfort side, right? There's nothing worse than saying, like, I've got this thing and now tomorrow it's a nightmare, right? So
yeah, I mean, I sponsored a loan on a big deal out in Texas, and there were a bunch of issues in that regard, right? The property manager was bonus based on tenant placement, not based on collections, or not based on actually receiving rents, right? And so they placed over 150 unqualified tenants in this property, and it's all reactionary, right? And they kind of they did it in the system themselves, whereas there's sort of like stop loss or like triggers in our software that wouldn't allow that to happen, wouldn't allow somebody to make up income, wouldn't allow them to not collect a security deposit, wouldn't allow them to override a failed background check and place that many people so that way they can get bonus. And then we didn't find out about it because they didn't give us accurate financial statements, right? They had two different softwares, and they had somebody coming in and doing it separately than from the management software. And so because of it, they were able to essentially cover up for, it was about four or 5 months before we found out there were all sorts of age payables, utility bills that weren't being paid that they didn't put onto the financial statement. So the financials looked like they were okay, but all that stuff would get triggered with smart management to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks and everything's 100% transparent all the time.
yeah, I mean, when we say our goal is 95% occupancy, right? That's 2 weeks of missed rent income. So when you're talking 4 months, right? Like that just, you're dead. You're dead in the water, right?
It crushed us.
I would say that's in part why I would say there's a couple different reasons why we've taken longer to get to market. Like typically most SaaS products is focus on the MVP, get to market fast and fail and iterate.
And fix as you go along, right? As
like,
you feedback.
I would say in this market, you can't do that. You can't stub your toe in that regard. And so essentially, instead of trying to come with a partial feature set in the fall, we've basically leaned in and said, hey, we're going to do the full suite before we launch, right? And a lot of that's been talking with your ops team of what are the bare essentials that, and that you must have to say, we're ready to go live. And the financial reporting side was like was one of those big things of like, What is the age payables? What's the connection to, right? And so the ability to drill in and go to deep and all that is crucial. I would say the biggest thing that I would say that we're doing differently is we're starting to create digital threads within our data, right? So like it's very easy to create this data lake of I've got invoices, I've got payments, I've got leases, I've got this and that, I've got communications. But in reality, it's a bunch of data lake that nobody knows how it's connected. I would say what we've done that I think is unique is we've started to create a digital thread through all this. So think of it like a rabbit trail, right? Like you start to go down this rabbit hole and there's different forks in the road. We're basically tethering it together with digital associations that says, when I'm looking at this, here's the next logical jump. And I don't have to go search through the database. I just click on it and that association's already there. So the person that's building it the first time knows what it is, and they create that such that when, let's say, a Matt comes and audits it, he's starting to look at age payables. Okay, here's the unpaid invoice. What's this tied to in terms of an equipment module, right? I can jump to that equipment module and see what its history is, or I can jump to the specific task to say, for this thing to be complete and signed off for this invoice, this work needs to be done. Mr. Contractor, did you actually do the work? Yes or no? I can see that in the database. I don't need to bother the property manager.
So talk about like how do we stop bad data in from then ruining the data set overall? Right? How do you stop if somebody puts in bad data or manipulates data on the input of things? How can we find that out sooner than later? Like what does this software do?
So I would say there's probably two parts to that. One is the ability to drive in standard SOPs that are dropped in, right? So like we're not looking for, to me the bigger thing is are we looking for a bad actor or are we looking for a sloppy employee? Two different types of problems we need to find, right? A sloppy employee is I'm going really fast and I'm not precise enough in what I'm expecting from the person.
Yep.
It's like, hey, I want you to go change a filter versus, hey, I need you to go to change the filter on this module and this is the actual filter size that you're going to need and this is how you remove it and this ... right? Like, so I'm setting this guy up such that when he walks there, he has the filter, he knows what he's doing, step by check. I'm just doing the work, right? Opposed to, hey, go change the filter means, okay, now I have to walk on site, I got to see the filter, now I need to go to Home Depot, I got to get it, now I got to come back, right? So let's talk about the sloppy employee, right? The fact that we're building in SOPs at a property level, right? Things that are your tried and true things that you just know that you always want to do in combination with local SOPs, right? So for example, on a specific heating unit, ideally they'd all be the same through the complex. Inevitably, they're likely not, right? So as we want to iteratively learn. So the first time we go, we might not know the filter, but like because we're associating this task with this actual piece of equipment, the next time we know what this filter size is. We should never have to then go back. And because we're quick associating all this data, when we ask him to go do this filter change, we're digitally giving him this file so he knows all that. So I would say that's the part where I think we're cleaning up the bad data in is driving in the SOPs at the property level and at the actual equipment level. Yep. I would say from the other side, from the, let's say, compliance aspect of a bad actor, of somebody that's not putting in the right data and or somebody manipulating, like in your case, right? I think it's a matter of us quickly being able to do audits on what we expect, right? So like as we're running our tasks of what needs to be done or not, we're actually prioritizing within the software, right? Who's doing what when? And I would say that that's a big difference with our software versus anything else, right? Not only at a local, in this unit, this is the priority dependence, but at the property level, which one do you prioritize, this unit or that unit, right? But in that regard, we also have the ability to sort of flip over into this inspection mode where it's, hey, here's all the tasks that Johnny has completed. Property manager, Matt Carlin, run through this and say, is this what I expect, right? And be able to audit that. I would say the next line is us starting to build in that expectation of Matt of saying, hey, let's build in these rules that say, Matt, what are the common things you would be inspecting and start throwing up those triggers when it's not met?
Yep. And I think that to me starts really creating the sizzle, right? I know a lot of the effort by the engineering team has been put the right baseline in place, which is where a lot of softwares mess up and they don't have a good foundation in place, and they have to go back and rebuild the software, and they have to go back and do it another 6-12 months, and it's like, it gets expensive, gets inefficient. There's a lot of issues and you've built enough softwares for some of the biggest technology companies in the entire world that you know how to do it the right way along with your team. And so that's exciting. Now knowing what I know about software engineering and developing this stuff. And then, but like from a guy like me, I'm more of like the sizzle guy, right? Like I love the marketing type stuff. And to your point, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of these things like the prioritization that you mentioned, right? You go into a 200 unit apartment complex and you got to renovate 100 units. Some of them are studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, maybe some 4 bedrooms, maybe different size 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, extra bathrooms, whatever. And depending on where they're located, maybe they get a little bit more rent, maybe they get a little bit less rent, maybe there's more demand for a certain unit size versus another one. And you're handing that off to somebody who's an X number of dollar a year employee to make a decision to prioritize all this stuff. Well, how long does it take to turn that unit, right? How much money is it going to cost to turn that unit? And how much rent will that unit generate once it is rented out? And how quickly will it rent out because of the amount of demand? That's it. And there's all these other different variables that you're essentially handing off to somebody else to make that decision, whereas this software can take all those variables, create its own algorithm, and prioritize. This is the fastest unit to get online at the lowest cost, that's going to lease the quickest and generate the most money. And that now you can easily prioritize all 100 units and say, this is the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, and go all the way down it. That kind of stuff is exciting, right? The triggers that go off that say, hey, the management company paid the water bill $2,500 a month every single month, and then all of a sudden this month, no water bill got paid. Guess what? There might be a missing water bill. There might be an age payable somewhere that you don't have to wait 6 months for the water to get shut off or get these nasty letters from the utility company or realize that they're not reporting properly. Like, it sends up a red flag right then and notifies you. Or vice versa, $2,500, $2,500, $2,500, and then all of a sudden there's an $8,000 bill. And you're like, oh shoot, there must be a leak somewhere in the property somewhere because this isn't normal, right? And so it at least triggers where now you can catch these things sooner. And I think, one of the things that I've learned as I talk to, 9-figure and 10-figure business owners, I had the pleasure of talking to a guy and then seeing him speak about the psychology of money. And one of the things that he said is risk is what you cannot plan for. Risk is what you cannot see. And I think most people, when buying apartment buildings and starting a business and growing things, they think the risk is, the person or the person they're hiring or this operation or this. Like, you can plan for all those things. And people just perceive it as risk, and that's something like, we're gonna have to deal with that. No, you don't have to deal with it, right? If you're lazy or if you're sloppy or if you're not planning properly and you're inexperienced, yeah, you're gonna have to deal with those things. But this software comes in and helps reduce all of that risk. So now the only real risk factors, right? It's like, risk is what you cannot see. Risk is what's left over after you've planned for everything else. This software plans for everything else. Now the real risk is black swan events, right? Like a COVID or like a 9/11 or something like that. But all this other stuff can be planned for. And now that you know that a software like this exists and this is a tool that you can use, it's your fault if you don't use it.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about liking the sizzle and the sexy things, right? Where it really moves the needle. If we look at what I did at Rockwell Automation, right? Mm-hmm. That's who I was. I was the guy that would come in and make it work without me even being there, right? Like, that was basically my job, was to come in and say, I just want my machine to work no matter what. I want you to take, like, I was the fixer. Like, if they couldn't get, let's say, a mechanical system working, I was usually the last line of defense of like, figure this thing out, whether it's a mechanical problem, a machine coordination problem, and really what people would, it's like, I want that expert without you having to be there because you can't be everywhere.
Right.
I just want it, from the time I flip it on, it should just work that way. And really that's what we moved to in automation, right? To the point where every motor that Rockwell sells, like it no longer needs this smart guy controlling it. It just works and it tells you what the problem is for you to then go detect it. It just fixes itself and then it tells you, hey, you got a potential problem, right? That's from one perspective. The other is from a coordination perspective, right? I think about one of the last projects that I was working on, they made yogurt, right? They were doing yogurt packets and they built this huge machine and inevitably it wasn't meeting the spec requirements, right? So it was, do we tear this whole thing apart or do we figure out a smarter way to do the process such that we can achieve the requirements, right? And it was, oh, we forgot to tell you it's going to be soaking wet when we run this thing. It's not in dry conditions, right? So of course your friction coefficient changes and all the dynamics change, right? So it was a matter of how do we come in and not require the smartest person in the room to get this thing working, right? We want it to be able to work with a normal person, normal effort, where it can just do its thing, right? Now, in order to get to that point, you have to have a huge foundation. Like at Rockwell, I couldn't have added the sizzle without the decades worth of infrastructure to set that foundation, right? I couldn't have done that without the ops team, like the Rockwell ops team that had the relationship with the customer that would basically say, hey, you can trust this guy. And why can you trust this guy? Because we've gone and tested it against the hardest of hardest, right? I've got a principle of like, I always try to break it. If I can break it and it breaks, if I try to break it and it breaks, I know that I still have a problem to resolve.
Yeah.
Or if I try to break it, then I know it's good, right? So to me, what we're doing is saying, hey, we're going to the Springfield use case, which is the hardest of hardest, and say, I want to build a foundation to build upon to add all these sizzles. And you know, it's taken longer to get there than I would have hoped, right? To build this foundation component, but you know, it's turning out better than I could have hoped for, right? Like the foundation is there for us to begin gluing all these things together and really making a needle, like making a difference. So I'm pretty excited with where we're going.
Yeah, me too. Well, I think at the end of the day, what matters, right? We're in a financially based business of investing. And of the businesses I've seen, there's a lot of companies that have a lot of fat on their expenses and are run inefficiently or run ineffectively. But even the most effectively and efficiently run businesses I've found have minimum 3 to 10% of waste somewhere in their financials, right? And even if it's run efficiently and they have that much waste, on a 100-unit apartment complex at $1,000 a month in rent, you're looking at $100,000 a month in revenue, 12 months, that's $1.2 million business on just one 100-unit apartment building. You have $1 million business. And if you have 3 to 10% fat, if you have 3 to 10% waste in your financials, you're talking about somewhere between $36,000, right, to $120,000 of money that you're just lighting on fire. That should be going straight to the bottom line, and it's not, and it's being lit on fire. And so when you start thinking about a software that's a few dollars per month per unit, right, and all these efficiencies that it can put in place in order to then trim that fat, at a 6% cap rate, you're talking about somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million of valuation differential on that because of the waste that's in the financials. And so if you're able to implement a simple software like this, where everything else is costing more money, this actually saves you money, and there's a direct ROI that you can see on that, you're talking about an increase in your valuation of your business, of that property, by $500,000 to $1 million at a standard 6% cap rate, you know? And so it becomes, and maybe more than it could be up to $2 million if it's $120,000 NOI that you're able to save. But at the end of the day, it's like, this is something that's not nice to have. It is nice to have, but it is essential to have. With sellers not coming down, buyers can't go up, right? costs increasing across the board on everything else, this is the way that you can continue growing your business. This is the way that you can continue growing your portfolio and increasing the efficiency of your existing portfolio where there's no other solutions out there.
And it's about detecting the problem and knowing what to expect, right? Like, local property manager only knows what local property manager knows, right? So let me give an example of the church that I'm a part of, right? Was looking at their facility, right? 120,000 square feet, large, I would say, 10, $20 million facility. I would say for years and years, the expenses people just expected, because it's always what they expected. And like looking at the electric bill, I'm like, dude, this is out of whack.
Yeah.
Like, what in the world? Like, in part it just was big relative to the budget on everything else, but it was like $180,000, right?
Wow.
Right, and it was like that. Somebody's got to go poke that bear a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, there's no data here, right? Like, we had our financial data, but like, this was a smart guy, right? Just going and looking at it. We go and look at this, and this half the building is built in 2006.
Wow.
Right? So like, half the building's old, half the building's new. Like, so we start poking the bear. The whole boiler system isn't insulated, right? Like, all the feed lines aren't insulated. So with a couple weeks of work and $2,000, we go cut our energy bill by 30 grand annually, right? Just by saying, what do I expect? Now, the bookkeeper, the financial people, they always paid that. So it wasn't outside the norm. It was, hey, like, I need to have some sort of expectation unitized to be able to detect the problem.
Yep.
Right? Now, the more data we get, the more that we're going to be able to build in those smart solutions to detect the problem. But that's what, when I say bring the automation mindset, that's what we're bringing in. Once you have the data in the system, it's easy to start bringing normalization expectations to say, hey, Mr. Property Manager, you think you're managing it well, but here's a report on things that, compared to others, you're likely missing, you might want to look into.
Yep. Your insurance cost per unit is way more in this area than anybody else is paying. Contact your insurance broker. Here's a handful of other ones. Like, reach out to some people because you can easily save money on this thing. Or, you're in a deregulated energy state, and these are the other energy providers for electricity or natural gas that you can go to at a lower price per kilowatt or a lower price per whatever, and reduce your utility bills. Or you got this or that or whatever else is the water bill, and taxes. You can appeal your property tax. Like, there's all these little things that it sends up these triggers and notifies you that you can save money in certain capacities, where other people just aren't. They're not acting like an owner. They're not asking those questions.
But that's why I'm so excited about us partnering, right? So like, to an extent, I can chameleon on both sides, but like, I'm not a large operator like you guys are, right? You're not a software developer, right? So partnering with you guys is like, we're not just developing a software product, like, we're a user of the product, right? And basically, you from an investment perspective, Matt from an operations perspective, hey, what are the biggest bottlenecks? What are the things I need you to start telling me? And that's what all of our customers are going to benefit from. We're not just creating a nice UI on top of a database for a SaaS product, right? That we don't really know the pain points on. No, we're going to be using it day to day in your portfolio, and basically everything we learn, we're chasing as fast as we can to integrate it in so our customers can benefit too.
I'm excited. So what does it look like? When is it going to be available for people to check out?
I would say, we're over our biggest. In the fall, there were a couple big things in terms of becoming a true fintech company that we'd been working through that delayed our process. But
there's been a lot of compliance stuff, a lot of things that we didn't really.
The compliance part was, when we first started, we anticipated leveraging Stripe and some off-the-shelf financial products, right, to go fast to market. We'd already done that in the past, but as we started looking at where we wanted to go in terms of large project aspects, right? When you're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars on the capital buy and then millions of dollars on the project turns, like being dependent on a Stripe, we needed to control our own destiny,
100%.
right? So essentially, we've created our own little pay power, right?
Yep.
Which means that we've got to go through all the compliance, all the due diligence, and all that stuff. So that's taken longer than we anticipated, but we're on the backside of all that now, and integrating
It's
stuff.
amazing that we have all that stuff put together. It's awesome.
It's in addition to all the other things, where
Right.
many little PayPal integrated in, right? So I would say our goal is this summer, right? July, August timeframe to start rolling it out on your properties, right? Like, to me, it's, we can't screw up,
Yep.
right? So like, we want to go make sure that whatever we say is going to work, and we fully vetted it, right? So we'll start on your Cleveland portfolio
Yep.
and a couple of small units, and basically, as soon as your team has confidence, that's the green light to then take it to the wider market.
Yep.
But I would say, I would say in the April-May timeframe is when I'm ready to start having these sort of pre-sale discussions with people, to start talking, hey, the product will be at the point where you'll see what it is from an operation sense. Does this make sense or not? And start having some of those pre-sale discussions. So I'm excited to start doing that here in the late spring.
And the other beauty of how we've structured this is we actually carved out a portion of the equity in the tech company for essentially the early adopters of the software, right? Like, obviously, it's like changing your cell phone provider. It's just changing your software is a painful thing unless it's more painful to keep your existing software. And there's a lot of bad softwares out there. There's a lot of really bad issues with management right now that, as the tide goes out on the real estate market, people are being exposed in a big way. When the market's good, people can cover up, inefficient operations with just a good market. That can kind of put some fog on top of it, but it's really being exposed today. And I'm seeing it over and over and over again across different management companies, different operators, and you see it in the news headlines and all this stuff. So it's painful enough, right? It's painful enough right now where this can solve a lot of problems, right? And because it solves a lot of problems, not only is your operation going to be run more efficiently, but you can also earn equity in the tech company, which there's no way you would have left your role and the ascension ladder that you were on to essentially run that company over the course of the next few years without this being a potential $1 billion opportunity, And so that, to me, gets super exciting, and it rewards the early adopters, the management companies, the operators for coming on board, utilizing the software, helping to promote the software, and they're going to get to be able to ride that wave on top of having more efficient operations, on top of having a better valued property, more income, more NOI, more cash flow in their real estate portfolio. They also are starting to build some wealth in a tech company as well that will eventually hopefully go public or sell to private equity and have a huge upside, a big payday at some point in the future. So that gets really exciting and allows people to see the big picture, right? And be in it for the long haul with us. And there's no way that this doesn't turn into a multi-$100 million or $1 billion company at some point in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, so at Rockwell, I wasn't on path to become the COO, but I was a technical heavyweight there, right? But I would say my uniqueness was I owned everything from ideation to customer adoption, right? Like I blended this, technical and commercial and application space, right? It was not just an idea, but it had to then get adopted and actually be used. And so to me, the ability to get somebody to adopt technology is crucial, right? Like, and so there's a lot of pain there, right? Like, when we took basically my brain and pumped it into our product that it would just work like an expert would work, all I had to do was tell them, check the checkbox. We couldn't get them to check the checkbox.
Yep.
Like, until we went out and did like this stump the chump and really worked with them to show them it. Then once we got that momentum, like, it was game over. Then like, it was zero work. But at the very beginning, it was hard to get to prime the pump.
Yep.
So to me, that was the biggest risk, right? It wasn't that I doubted we could build the software or doubted that we could build something that would be better than what's out there. It was a matter of priming the pump, and this idea of the customer partnership program of, like, lots of people talk about being partners with customers. Never heard anyone say, hey, like, for this high evaluation company with a drastically different multiple than a REIT would, hey, for coming and adopting early, I'm going to give you a piece of this pie for you to invest into.
Yep.
Like, that is such a huge carrot that makes me believe that it's not if we're going to win, it's when we're going to win,
yep.
right? Like, because I know that we've got the tech, I know that we have the process. As we bundle this together, it might be faster or slower, but we're going to win because our values are aligned and our incentives are aligned
yep.
to get to this critical mass. Once we get to the critical mass, the flywheel is going and you can't stop the momentum because you just now have more resources to pour on the fire. So I'm super excited about it.
Me too, man. Well, proud to be in business with you.
For sure.
Appreciate all the value you've brought to the partnership, and it seems like a lot of the heavy lifting and trying to figure things out. We've been through a lot of that. Obviously, the foundation is set, and now it's starting to get really exciting now that we can start bringing it to market. And I can't wait to use it on our own units. And then I know a lot of people in Legacy family are planning on adopting it right away, and then we'll take it to the greater market. So it's going to be super, super exciting, and we're going to make a big impact on a big splash in an industry that desperately needs more efficiency and more effectiveness in how they're operating right now. So sure. It's taking an antiquated, older industry, bringing tech into it, and merging the two. And obviously, there's a lot of different ways to build wealth and in real estate, and it is the most time-tested way of building wealth. And so, if we can help people build more wealth with the technology and all the advancements that we've come across and all the experience that we've had, I think it's game over for everyone. So, in a positive way, a big win, and just excited to be on the journey, man. So appreciate you.
Definitely.
Hey, appreciate you guys being here. Hopefully you got a ton of takeaways. If you are interested in adopting and becoming a customer partner of ours in Smart Management, go to smartmanagement.com and fill out the form and just input your information. We'll reach out to you whenever the software goes live. Planning on this summer, and you can be an early adopter, invest into and earn equity in the software and technology company that will be taken to market and growing and scaling substantially. So super excited about it. We've got thousands of units that we're going to be bringing online just in my own portfolio. Another 10,000, 20,000 units through our network, through our Mastermind Legacy family and our members there, and then taking it out to all the major financial institutions, lending institutions, construction management, property management companies, big owners that I know through social media and stuff. So get on board early. Just go to smartmanagement.com, input your information. We will reach out to you as soon as it's available. If it seems like a good fit, we'd love to have you as a partner.